Imagine waking up to the smell of diesel and the sound of chainsaws tearing through the woods you've owned for 20 years, only to find your HOA president directing a construction crew on your private property. Most people would scream, shout, or call the police immediately. I did none of those things. Instead, I poured a second cup of coffee and let them pour the concrete. If you appreciate a story where patience and property law combine to bankrupt a corrupt board, you might want to see how this unfolds. The first sign wasn't the noise, it was the vibration. Arthur Penhaligon felt the tremor through the soles of his slippers before he heard the diesel engine. He stood in his kitchen, a mug of black coffee suspended halfway to his mouth, watching the liquid ripple in concentric circles. 7 a.m. on a Saturday. He set the mug down on the granite counter, the silence of his routine shattered by the sudden, violent roar of heavy machinery. It sounded like a war zone, and it was coming from the worst possible direction, the North Ridge. Arthur didn't run. He didn't panic. He walked to the mudroom, swapped his slippers for worn leather work boots, and put on his spectacles. He was a man who believed in verifying data before forming a hypothesis. Stepping out onto his back porch, the cool morning air of the Pacific Northwest should have smelled of pine needles and damp earth. Instead, it choked him with the acrid scent of exhaust fumes and the heartbreaking aroma of fresh sawdust. He walked past his manicured lawn, past the flower beds his late wife had designed, and toward the tree line that marked the beginning of the wild section, 3 acres of untouched fir and cedar that acted as a natural barrier between his sanctuary and the rest of the Silver Creek estates. The tree line was gone. In its place stood a massive yellow excavator, its bucket currently ripping the roots of a 50-year-old Douglas fir out of the soil. The tree groaned, a sound like a cracking bone, and toppled sideways, crashing into the underbrush. Arthur stood at the edge of the devastation, his hands clasped behind his back. His heart hammered a dangerous rhythm against his ribs, but his face remained a mask of stone. "Hey!" A man in a hard hat and a reflective vest spotted him, the foreman. He waved a hand, signaling the operator to idle the engine. The roar died down to a rhythmic chug. "You can't be back here, Pop," the foreman shouted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "This is a construction zone. Insurance liability." Arthur stepped over a crushed fern. "I am aware of the liability. I am curious why you are excavating private property." "This ain't private," the foreman scoffed, checking a clipboard. "This is HOA Common Area B. We're clearing it for the Zen Garden project. Schedule says we pour the foundation for the gazebo by Tuesday." "Common Area B is 400 yards to the east," Arthur said, his voice level. "You are currently 150 feet inside parcel 402. My parcel." The foreman looked annoyed, ready to argue, but a shrill voice cut through the air. "Arthur, honestly, do you have to be a nuisance before 8 a.m.? Brenda Miller, the HOA president, marched through the mud in pristine white sneakers that were already ruined. She held a rolled-up set of plans like a baton. Brenda was the type of woman who believed that loud confidence was a substitute for legal accuracy. "Brenda," Arthur nodded slowly, "you're cutting down my trees." "Oh, stop it," Brenda rolled her eyes, gesturing grandly at the destruction. "We went over this in the board meeting last month, the one you didn't attend. This land has been lying fallow for decades. It's an eyesore. We're reclaiming the easement for the community. You should be thanking us. Your property value is going to skyrocket." "This isn't an easement," Arthur said, "and you didn't ask." "We don't need to ask to improve the neighborhood, Arthur. Read the bylaws. Clause 14, Section B regarding community beautification of neglected zones." She stepped closer, offering a condescending smile. "Look, just go back inside. Watch some TV. When this is done, you'll have a lovely view of the koi pond." She turned her back on him, signaling the foreman. "Start it up. We're burning daylight." The excavator roared back to life, drowning out any response Arthur might have made. Arthur stood there for a long moment, watching another tree fall. He didn't scream. He didn't throw himself in front of the machine. He simply memorized the position of the excavator relative to the oak tree on his left, a known boundary marker. He turned around and walked back to his house. Inside, the vibration was still shaking his coffee cup. Arthur ignored it. He walked past the kitchen and into his study. He unlocked the bottom drawer of a steel filing cabinet that hadn't been opened in 5 years. His fingers brushed past tax returns and manuals until they landed on a thick, dusty folder labeled Survey and Deeds, 1995. He pulled it out and laid it on his desk. He opened the folder, revealing a map covered in precise, hand-drawn lines and official county stamps. Clause 14, Section B, Arthur whispered to the empty room. Let's see what the county judge thinks about Clause 14. He reached for his phone, but then paused. If he stopped them now, they would just leave a mess, a few felled trees, a patch of mud. No, Arthur thought, watching the excavator through his window. Let them build it. Let them spend the money. Let them pour the concrete. He put the phone down and picked up a notepad. He wrote down the date, the time, and the name on the side of the excavator. The investigation had begun. The county recorder's office smelled of dust, toner ink, and the specific dry decay of aging paper. For Arthur, it was a comforting scent. It smelled like facts. While the chainsaws were currently dismembering the north corner of his property, Arthur stood at the polished oak counter of the records division, waiting for the clerk. He wasn't wearing his gardening clothes anymore. He was dressed in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, projecting the quiet authority of a man who knew exactly which form he needed. Mr. Penhaligon, the clerk said, adjusting her glasses. She was a middle-aged woman named Sarah, who had worked there long enough to remember when Arthur was the one stamping the surveys. We haven't seen you since the boundary dispute on the Miller farm 3 years ago. Good morning, Sarah, Arthur said, his voice low and steady. I need to pull the plat maps for the Silver Creek subdivision, specifically the filings from 1998 through 2005, and I need to see the rejected withdrawn proposals for the Phase 4 expansion. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Going digging in the graveyard? That Phase 4 proposal was a mess. The developer tried to squeeze 10 lots into a wetland. I have reason to believe someone thinks those lots exist, Arthur replied. 10 minutes later, Arthur was seated at a wide viewing table, a heavy-bound volume open before him. He ran a finger along the crisp blue lines of the official recorded map. Instrument number 2005-4492. There it was, his property line, a solid, unwavering black border that encompassed the 3 acres of woods. According to this document, the only one that mattered in a court of law, his land was inviolate. The common area ended exactly where he knew it did, at the old stone marker near the creek. He then opened the second folder, the one labeled Withdrawn. Inside was a glossy, colorful proposal map from 2008. It was titled Silver Creek Future Vision. In this version, the developer had optimistically drawn a community park that sliced deep into Arthur's property, assuming the homeowner would eventually sell or yield the land. The developer had gone bankrupt before they could even make an offer, and the map had been archived as a historical oddity. Arthur adjusted his spectacles. The shape of the community park on the rejected map matched the exact footprint of Brenda's Zen Garden. Brenda hadn't hired a surveyor. She hadn't pulled the deed. She had likely found this old, glossy marketing map in the HOA storage closet, assumed it was current, and decided to act on it to save money on unnecessary bureaucratic fees. It was gross negligence disguised as community leadership. Sarah, Arthur called out, standing up, I need a certified copy of the 2005 recorded plat, and if you can, a certified copy of the rejection letter for the 2008 proposal. You building a case, Arthur? I am building a lesson, he corrected. He paid the $30 fee for the documents. The raised seal of the county clerk was pressed into the paper, giving it a texture that felt heavier than steel. This wasn't just paper anymore. It was a sword. When Arthur pulled back into his driveway 40 minutes later, the destruction had accelerated. A dump truck was backing up onto his land, its reverse alarm beeping incessantly. Beep, beep, beep. It dumped a load of crushed gravel right over the spot where his favorite rhododendrons used to grow. Brenda was standing near the pile, pointing aggressively at a contractor who looked confused. She held a rolled-up plans, the invalid plans, like a scepter. Arthur sat in his car for a moment, the certified documents resting on the passenger seat. The urge to storm out there, wave the papers in her face, and scream, "Stop!" was powerful. It would save his trees. It would stop the noise, but it wouldn't stop Brenda. If he stopped her now, she would claim it was an honest mistake. She would apologize insincerely, leave the gravel pile on his land, and walk away unscathed. She would remain president. She would do it again to someone else. Arthur watched the dump truck drive away, leaving deep ruts in the soft earth. Let them pave it, he thought, his grip tightening on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Let them build the gazebo. Let them install the koi pond. Let them spend every single dime in the reserve fund. He picked up the certified mail envelope, walked into his house, and locked the evidence in his fireproof safe. Then he went to the kitchen and made a sandwich, eating it while watching the Zen Garden take shape on his stolen land. The construction crew worked from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. Arthur worked from midnight until 2. Under the cover of a moonless Tuesday night, Arthur moved through the remnants of his lower woods like a ghost. He wore dark coveralls and carried a canvas duffel bag heavy with electronics. The silence of the night was a stark contrast to the diesel-fueled chaos of the day, though the smell of wet concrete hung heavy in the air, a chemical intrusion into the natural scent of the forest. He approached a sturdy oak tree that stood about 20 feet from the edge of the new clearing. It was one of the few survivors on the perimeter. Arthur reached into his bag and pulled out a Browning Defender trail camera, a device usually used for tracking elk, but perfectly suited for tracking trespassing HOA board members. He mounted it 12 feet up, securing it with a locking python cable, angling the lens downward to capture a panoramic view of the construction site. He didn't stop at 1. By 2 a.m., he had installed 4 cameras at different vectors, creating a surveillance net that covered every square inch of the intrusion zone. The next morning, the show began. Arthur sat in his study, 3 monitors humming on his desk. He wasn't looking out the window anymore. He was watching the live feed. At 7:15 a.m., the crew arrived. At 7:30 a.m., Brenda Miller appeared. On the screen, the high-definition feed captured Brenda standing on what was technically Arthur's soil, arguing with the landscape architect. Arthur zoomed in. He could see her pointing at a cluster of native huckleberry bushes, plants Arthur had nurtured for 15 years. She made a cutting motion across her throat. Arthur watched as a laborer with a brush cutter obliterated the bushes in 30 seconds. He didn't wince. Instead, he opened an Excel spreadsheet titled Damages Master Log XSX. He typed Item 142, Mature Huckleberry Patch, Approx age 15 years, Replacement cost $1,200, Treble damages for intentional destruction $3,600. He hit enter. The total sum at the bottom of the spreadsheet ticked upward. The days turned into a week, and the Zen Garden began to take shape. It was an impressive display of misappropriated funds. The crew dug a massive kidney-shaped hole for the koi pond, piling the excavated dirt against the trunks of Arthur's remaining cedars, a death sentence for the trees as the soil would rot their bark. Arthur logged it. Soil compaction and root suffocation. Remediation cost $15,000. On Thursday, the concrete trucks arrived. This was the moment Arthur had been waiting for. This was the point of no return. He watched the feed as the chute swung out. Gray sludge poured onto the rebar grid they had laid directly over his property line. "That's it," Arthur whispered, taking a sip of his tea. "Make it permanent." By pouring concrete, the HOA had elevated the offense from simple trespass to permanent improvement on another's land. In the eyes of the law, this shifted the remedy from a simple apology to mandatory removal, and removing reinforced concrete was exponentially more expensive than pouring it. He zoomed in on the license plate of the concrete truck. He logged the company name. He logged the cubic yards poured. He logged the timestamps. Brenda was visible in the frame, actually clapping her hands as the foundation for the gazebo was smoothed out. She looked triumphant. She looked like a woman who had successfully civilized a savage land. She had no idea that every clap, every directive, and every footprint was being recorded in 4K resolution and stored on a terabyte hard drive in the house up the hill. Arthur checked the total on his spreadsheet. It had just crossed the 6-figure mark. He saved the file, backed it up to the cloud, and printed a hard copy. The noise outside was deafening, but in Arthur's study it was quiet. He picked up his phone. It was time to reach out, not to stop them, but to verify that they had absolutely no intention of stopping themselves. He needed them to deny his ownership one last time, in writing. The art of the trap lies not in the spring, but in the bait. Arthur sat at his desk, the glow of the monitor illuminating his face in the dim light of the study. Outside, the sun had set, silencing the machinery for the day, but the damage was visible even in the dark. The silhouette of the half-built gazebo loomed like a skeleton against the night sky. He opened his email client and composed a new message. The recipient list included Brenda Miller, the entire HOA Board of Directors, and the property management company. Subject: Inquiry regarding construction coordinates, North Ridge Sector. He typed slowly, choosing every word with the precision of a surgeon. He did not use capital letters to scream. He did not use exclamation points. He wrote, "Dear board members, regarding the ongoing Zen Garden project, I am requesting a digital copy of the current stamped land survey used to determine the setbacks and boundary lines for the construction. My records indicate a potential discrepancy regarding the northern perimeter. Please provide this documentation at your earliest convenience so we may verify the encroachment status." He read it twice. It was perfect. It was the email of a confused old man, not an angry adversary. It gave them an out. If they were smart, they would pause, check the maps, realize their error, and apologize. He hit send at 8:03 p.m. For 3 days, there was silence from the digital world, while the physical world outside continued to get louder. The landscape crew brought in a crane on Wednesday. They lowered a massive 3-ton stone Buddha statue onto a concrete plinth. Arthur watched from his kitchen window as the statue was oriented to face the rising sun, directly staring into his master bedroom. He added the statue to his spreadsheet. Item 204, imported granite statuary, installation, cost estimated, $8,000. Removal difficulty, high. On Friday afternoon, his computer chimed. A reply. Arthur didn't open it immediately. He finished wiping down his spectacles, put them on, and sat down. He clicked the bold text. The email was from Brenda Miller, CCing the HOA attorney. Mr. Penhaligon, the board is in receipt of your repeated inquiries. Please be advised that the Zen Garden project was fully approved by the Architectural Control Committee 6 months ago. The land in question is designated Common Area B on the Community Master Plan. We are under no obligation to relitigate settled matters or indulge in frivolous bureaucratic delays. Furthermore, your continued interference with our contractors has been noted. Consider this a formal warning. Any further harassment of the work crew will result in fines per Bylaw 12.4, interference with community vendors. We suggest you enjoy the improvements we are making to your view. Regards, Brenda Miller, President. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair. A rare, cold smile touched his lips. She hadn't sent the survey. She hadn't sent it because she didn't have it. Instead, she had threatened him. In a court of law, this email was gold. It proved that when presented with a warning about a boundary error, the defendant chose to threaten the property owner rather than verify the claim. It moved the needle from accidental trespass to willful and malicious encroachment. Malicious encroachment carried a very different penalty. It often allowed for punitive damages. Arthur moved the cursor to the print icon. The laser printer whirred to life, spitting out 3 copies of Brenda's arrogance. He took one copy and stapled it to the certified deed he had retrieved from the county. He opened a physical file drawer and dropped the stapled documents inside. The folder made a solid thud. The bait had been taken. Now he just had to wait for them to tighten the noose around their own necks. He looked out the window at the stone Buddha. "Enjoy the view," Arthur repeated softly. "I intend to." The silence that followed the completion of the project was worse than the noise. For 3 weeks, the air had been filled with the roar of engines and the shouting of men. Now the air was filled with the gentle, artificial burbling of a high-efficiency water pump. Arthur stood on his back deck, looking at the transformation. The wild, chaotic beauty of his fir grove had been sanitized. In its place lay a perfectly manicured lawn, a kidney-shaped koi pond surrounded by imported river stones, and the massive granite Buddha that stared unblinkingly at Arthur's kitchen window. But the most offensive feature wasn't the garden itself. It was the fence. To secure the new community asset, Brenda had authorized the installation of a 6-foot-tall cedar privacy fence. It ran in a rigid straight line, slicing off the developed acre from the rest of Arthur's property. Arthur walked down his lawn to the fence line. He reached out and touched the smooth, varnished wood. The fence didn't just encroach, it effectively seized the land. By building a physical barrier, the HOA was now exerting exclusive control over the territory. In legal terms, they had moved from trespassing to ousting the owner. He tested the gate. It was locked. A keypad blinked red. Arthur, the man who held the deed to the soil beneath his boots, was locked out of his own property. He couldn't walk to the creek anymore. He couldn't check his old survey markers. He was a stranger on his own land. He turned back toward the house. The mail carrier had just pulled away from the curb. Arthur retrieved the stack of mail. On top sat a thick envelope with the Silver Creek HOA logo, a stylized pine tree that looked nothing like the actual trees they had just cut down. He took it into the study, slit the envelope open with a brass letter opener, and unfolded the heavy cream-colored paper. It wasn't a newsletter. It was an invoice. Notice of Special Assessment Re. North Ridge Community Improvement Project. Dear homeowner, as a direct beneficiary of the newly completed Zen Garden and perimeter security protocol, your property has been assessed for a portion of the material costs. Please find below the itemized bill for the privacy fencing abutting your lot. Amount due, $4,250, where due date upon receipt. Note, failure to pay will result in a lien being placed on the property. Arthur stared at the number. The audacity was breathless. They had trespassed on his land, destroyed his timber, built a park he didn't want, locked him out of it, and were now charging him $4,000 for the privilege. He didn't get angry. He felt a cold, sharp clarity, like the snap of a surveyor's line. This bill was the final piece of the puzzle. It proved that the HOA was not merely negligent. They were extracting value. They were racketeering. Arthur picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 2 years. It rang twice before a sharp, familiar voice answered. Arthur? You haven't called since you retired. Hello, Evelyn, Arthur said, his eyes fixed on the invoice. Evelyn was the nastiest, most expensive real estate litigator in the Tri-County area. She ate developers for breakfast and HOA boards for dessert. To what do I owe the pleasure? She asked. I have a case for you, Arthur said. It involves trespass, destruction of timber, adverse possession, and, let's call it, creative billing. How bad is the damage? Arthur looked at his spreadsheet on the screen. The number was astronomical. They paved an acre of my land, Evelyn, and they just sent me the bill for the fence they used to lock me out. There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of a chair shifting. He could practically hear her smiling. Don't pay the bill, Arthur, Evelyn said, her voice dropping an octave. Scan it, send it to me, and tell me exactly when their next public meeting is. Next Tuesday, Arthur replied. The Annual Gala. Perfect, Evelyn said. I'll start drafting the complaint. You just make sure the projector works. Arthur hung up. He looked at the invoice one last time, then placed it gently on top of the pile in the filing cabinet. The investigation was over. The war was about to begin. The Silver Creek Community Center was decorated with blue and white balloons, the colors of the Homeowners Association. A banner hung above the stage, celebrating vision and value. The room was packed. 150 homeowners sat in folding chairs, balancing paper plates of stale cookies and cups of lukewarm punch. At the front of the room, Brenda Miller stood at the podium, basking in the glow of a spotlight. She wore a sequin jacket that caught the light every time she gestured. And finally, Brenda beamed, raising a glass of sparkling cider. We must acknowledge the jewel in our crown. The North Ridge Zen Garden is officially open. We took a neglected, overgrown eyesore and turned it into a sanctuary for all of us. This is what leadership looks like. Applause rippled through the room. A few board members nodded vigorously. Arthur Penhaligon sat in the back row, his briefcase resting on his knees. He wore his best charcoal suit, the one he used to wear for federal court testimonies. When the applause died down, he stood up. Madam President, his voice projected clearly across the room, cutting through the murmurs. I have a point of order regarding the new budget. Brenda squinted against the spotlight. Arthur, we're in the celebration phase, not the grievance phase. You can email the committee. It pertains to the Zen Garden asset, Arthur continued, walking steadily down the center aisle, and the liability attached to it. I believe the membership has a right to see the data before the fiscal year closes. Brenda sighed into the microphone, an exaggerated sound of patience being tested. Fine. You have 2 minutes, Arthur. Make it quick. She stepped aside, gesturing to the AV cable dangling from the lectern. She expected him to fumble. She expected a handwritten note about noise complaints. Arthur placed his laptop on the podium and plugged in the HDMI cable. The screen behind him flickered, then resolved into a crisp, high-resolution image. It wasn't a complaint. It was a slide titled Geospatial Analysis of Parcel 402. Slide 1, Arthur said calmly. The screen changed. It showed a scanned copy of the invoice for $450, the bill for the fence. This week, the board billed me for a perimeter fence, Arthur explained. This establishes that the board acknowledges the new construction creates a boundary with my lot. Arthur, we know you're cheap, Brenda interrupted, laughing nervously. Pay your bills. Slide 2, Arthur ignored her. The image changed to the official 1990 county survey map. A thick red laser line traced the property boundary of Arthur's 3 acres. This is the legal deed to my property, Arthur said. Note the coordinates of the iron pin at the northeast corner. Slide 3. The room went deadly silent. The screen now showed a drone photograph taken from directly overhead. It showed the newly built Zen Garden, the pond, the gazebo, the concrete paths. Then Arthur pressed a key. The red line from the 1995 map animated onto the drone photo. The red line didn't border the garden. It swallowed it. The entire Zen Garden, every stone, every gallon of water, the massive Buddha statue, sat completely inside the red box of Arthur's private land. The common area was shown as a thin strip of grass 50 yards away. A gasp went through the audience. Someone in the second row whispered, "Oh my God." As you can see, Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion, the HOA has not improved common land. The HOA has trespassed onto private property, destroyed $60,000 worth of mature timber, and poured concrete on land it does not own. Brenda rushed the podium. Turn it off. This is fake. He's manipulating the pictures. Arthur stepped back, shielding the laptop. He clicked to the final slide. It was a video clip from his trail camera. It showed Brenda standing next to the surveyor stakes, kicking one out of the ground and throwing it into the bushes. The video played on a loop. Kick, throw, kick, throw. This is willful malicious trespass, Arthur defined the term for the room. Under state law, this entitles the victim to treble damages. My lawyer estimates the cost to restore the land to its original condition, plus punitive damages for the theft of timber, is approximately $450,000. He looked out at the stunned crowd. The homeowners weren't applauding anymore. They were doing the math. They realized that they were the HOA. They would be paying for Brenda's mistake. I am not here to negotiate, Arthur said, unplugging his laptop as the screen went black. I am here to inform you that you have 30 days to remove your improvements from my property. If not, the lawsuit will bankrupt this association. He snapped his laptop shut. Brenda stood frozen at the podium, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector cooling down. Arthur walked back up the center aisle. No one stopped him. The balloons looked ridiculous now. The conference room on the 42nd floor of the downtown legal district smelled of lemon polish and expensive fear. On one side of the mahogany table sat Brenda Miller and 2 other ashen-faced board members. Beside them sat their attorney, a man named Mr. Henderson who looked like he hadn't slept since the night of the gala presentation. On the other side sat Arthur Penhaligon and Evelyn Vance. Evelyn did not look tired. She looked like a predator who had just been served a 3-course meal. Let's be reasonable, Mr. Henderson started, opening a thin file folder. The association acknowledges a procedural error in the citing of the amenity. However, the Zen Garden is a significant value add to the community. To tear it down now would be a waste of resources. The board is prepared to offer Mr. Penhaligon fair market value for the acre in question, plus a 20% inconvenience premium. Brenda nodded vigorously, her usual arrogance replaced by desperate hope. It's a beautiful park, Arthur. Why destroy it? We'll pay you for the land. Everyone wins. Arthur stared at a smudge on the polished table. He didn't speak. He left that to Evelyn. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, peering over the rim. Mr. Henderson, you're aware of the video evidence showing your client removing survey stakes? We can test the context of that footage, Henderson said quickly. And the email where my client warned you of the boundary issue and you responded with a threat? Evelyn continued, her voice silky and dangerous. And my personal favorite, the invoice you sent him for the fence? You billed a man for a fence built on his own land to lock him out of his own property. Evelyn leaned forward. That invoice is the nail in the coffin, counsel. It proves knowledge of ownership. This wasn't an accident. It was a hostile taking. Under state law, that's not a property dispute. It's conversion. It's theft. She slid a thick document across the table. It landed with a heavy slap. We are not selling the land, Evelyn stated flatly. Arthur doesn't want your money. He wants his trees. Brenda slammed her hand on the table. He can't demand we replant 50-year-old trees. That's impossible. Actually, Arthur spoke up for the first time. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. It is entirely possible. There are nurseries in Oregon that specialize in relocating mature conifers. It is expensive, certainly, but not impossible. The estimate to demolish the concrete, remove the debris, decompact the soil, and replant the grove is $280,000. Evelyn said, tapping the document. Plus legal fees. If we go to trial, we will seek treble damages for the timber theft, bringing the total to nearly $900,000. That amount exceeds the HOA's liability insurance cap, which means the homeowners, specifically the board members individually, would be liable for the difference. Mr. Henderson paled. He leaned over and whispered frantically into Brenda's ear. Brenda's face went from red to white. She looked at Arthur, searching for any sign of mercy. She found only the impassive gaze of a surveyor who had measured the lines and found her wanting. You can't do this, she whispered. The neighborhood will hate us. They'll have to pay a special assessment just to tear down a park. They are already paying a special assessment because you didn't check the map, Arthur said. The only question is whether they pay to fix it or pay 3 times as much to fight me. Evelyn uncapped a fountain pen and pushed the document closer to Brenda. This is a consent decree, Evelyn explained. It stipulates that the HOA has 30 days to remove all improvements, including the concrete foundation in the statue. It requires soil remediation to Arthur's specifications, and it requires the resignation of the current board president for gross negligence. The room was silent for a long minute. The hum of the building's HVAC system seemed deafening. Mr. Henderson sighed and pushed the pen toward Brenda. Sign it, Brenda, before they change their minds. Brenda's hand shook as she picked up the pen. She looked at the document, the Zen Garden dream dissolving into ink and paper. She signed. Arthur didn't smile. He simply nodded, stood up, and buttoned his jacket. I expect the noise to stop by 5:01 p.m. on the 30th day, Arthur said. He walked out of the conference room, leaving the board to figure out how to explain to 150 homeowners that their new park was about to become the most expensive pile of dirt in county history. The jackhammers arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. To anyone else in Silver Creek Estates, the sound was an annoyance, a harsh staccato rhythm shattering the suburban peace. But to Arthur Penhaligon, standing on his back deck with a steaming mug of Earl Grey, it sounded like a symphony. It was the sound of a mistake being corrected. Down in the lower acre, the scene was a chaotic reversal of the last 2 months. A crew of workers, looking far less enthusiastic than they had when they were building, were taking sledgehammers to the decorative stone walls of the koi pond. The water had been drained the day before, leaving a muddy, plastic-lined pit that looked like an open wound. The massive granite Buddha, which had cost the HOA $8,000 to install, was currently being hoisted into the air by a crane. It spun slowly in the drizzle, looking almost mournful, before being lowered onto a flatbed truck to be auctioned off to recoup a fraction of the losses. Arthur watched the demolition with the same impassive expression he had worn during the construction. He checked his watch. 8:05 a.m. They were on schedule. A movement caught his eye near the street. A moving truck was parked in front of the house, 3 doors down, Brenda Miller's house. Brenda was not supervising the demolition today. After the consent decree became public knowledge, the community Zen Garden had been quickly renamed Brenda's Folly by the neighbors. The special assessment fee of $2,000 per household to pay for the demolition and legal fees had destroyed her social standing faster than she had destroyed Arthur's trees. Arthur watched as Brenda carried a box to the truck. She looked up across the lawns and saw him standing on his deck. She paused. For a moment, Arthur thought she might shout something, some final defiance. But she just slumped her shoulders, turned away, and climbed into her car. She drove off before the moving truck had even closed its doors. By Friday, the concrete foundation of the gazebo was gone. The heavy equipment churned up the compacted soil, loosening the earth that had been suffocated under the weight of the patio. Then came the restoration trucks. Under the watchful eye of an arborist Arthur had selected, and the HOA had paid for, a team began planting. They didn't plant flower beds or ornamental grasses. They planted saplings, Douglas fir, western red cedar, and hemlock. They were young trees only 6 or 7 feet tall, nothing compared to the giants that had been lost. But they were native. They belonged here. The foreman walked up the hill to where Arthur was standing. It was the same foreman who had called him Pop 2 months ago. He looked humble now. "That's the last of the soil remediation, Mr. Penhaligon," the foreman said, handing Arthur a clipboard. "We pulled up all the rebar. We aerated the root zones of the surviving trees. It's as close to wild as we can get it." Arthur took the clipboard. He walked down the slope, his boots sinking slightly into the fresh, dark earth. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, where the privacy fence used to be. The fence was gone, recycled into mulch. The barrier was removed. He walked to the center of the land, the exact spot where the gazebo had stood. He looked up at the sky, now visible through the gap in the canopy, but soon to be filled again by the slow, steady work of nature. He signed the clipboard and handed it back. "Thank you," Arthur said. "Sorry about the mess, sir," the foreman mumbled. "It is not a mess anymore," Arthur replied. "Now it is just dirt, and dirt I can work with." The crew packed up. The trucks rumbled away. The diesel engines faded into the distance. Arthur remained in the woods. He waited until the last echo died out. The silence returned, heavy and sweet. A squirrel chattered from a branch of a surviving oak. The wind rustled the needles of the new saplings. He took a deep breath, smelling the pine and the rain, finally cleansed of the exhaust and the arrogance. He checked his pockets, found his survey tape, and patted it reassuringly. The lines were drawn. The map was respected. Arthur Penhaligon turned and walked back to his house. It was time for a second cup of coffee.